Point. Let me just put this to you. Let's say we had no debt, and technically we have none, government debt. What case is there?
Well, Howard Costello would say that's down to them.
No, it's not down to them. It was just down to the growth that came from the reforms of the Hawke and Keating years, and nothing else produced it. Of course, they were the lucky mugs who picked up the money and then spent most of it. But leave that to one side. If you are in a position where there is basically no government debt, what case is there for the government of a country to soak its citizens so it accumulates assets? You know, why should a citizenry pay taxes to accumulate assets on the public account if there's no particular point to it? So all this religious approach to surpluses is the sort of stuff you expect from sort of failed investment bankers.
Let me ask you this. What do you think of tax cuts as a way of stimulating the economy?
It's a way. Tax cuts are in the pipeline, and I just think they should be left in the pipeline. That's fine. The big problem will be getting banks lending again. The banks have bandaged themselves up and gone home. That's the problem. The problem is, how do we get them back out there? See, commercial lending's a very risky business, as we can now see. So now, of course, being the lemmings they are, the banks are now deciding, well, they don't really like commercial lending anymore, so they've all now turned turtle. Now, what we've got to do is get them back out there again.
What do you think about the concept of building a bad debt bank? Take all the bad debts, put them in one place, manage them.
That's happened around the world on a number of occasions, you know, and that may happen in the United States. But the United States is also going to go through a very long and deep recession and a massive period of adjustment. I'll be very surprised if this is any less than 6 or 7 years.
6 or 7 years at this level?
Well, look at the Japanese. It took them from 1989 to 2003 to bring down their bubble. I mean, what is a bubble? It's worth analysing what is a bubble. When there's so much cheap credit around, and it was the cheapness of credit, the cheapness of capital that produced this problem, then people watch their home values rise because the next house in the street went for a new record price, financed again by the cheap credit. So they think, oh, my wealth's gone up. Their wealth really hasn't changed, but their relative wealth has risen. Then they see it happen more and more, and it happens over a number of years. So then they say, well, this is better than saving. So they stop saving and they start borrowing. And as they borrow, the debt gets more available and even cheaper. So they borrow more. So what you end up with is a bubble. You end up a true bubble with no substance at its core.
I want to ask you about government measures to deal with some of these issues, and particularly with the crisis in lending. The present government is starting to get mixed up in the markets. And I'm wondering, do you think it's a good idea for the government to be issuing upwards of $26 billion in government bonds to fund failing commercial property loans?
Well, I don't think it's wise for any of us to say which sector is good or bad or deserves support. The thing is, when you have a crisis of this proportion, and fortunately our banking sector is in a way better position than most anyone else. You see, our 4 banks are now in the top 15 banks. Before this crisis, only one was in the first 50. Now we've got 4 in the top 15. And it hasn't happened by accident. It's there because the fact that what happened in 1990 was seared into the minds of our banking community, and our regulators have sat on them, and of course we kept them locked up under 4 pillars.
All right, but you know there's serious concerns in Labor circles about this. I mean, especially when huge sums of money are being allocated to prop up possibly overpriced assets in the commercial property sector when nothing very much is being done for the private housing sector.
Well, I don't think that at the moment a lot necessarily needs to be done for the private housing sector, but the biggest problem, I think, is really in the unavailability of debt for infrastructure. You've got infrastructure companies and commercial property companies that have got capital, prepared to do things, but can't raise the debt because the banks have gone home. You see, this is a problem. You see, when you get to this sort of a problem, notwithstanding the quality of the balance sheets of the Australian major 4 banks, you know, you're starting to see a real turn down in the availability of credit and a tightening of the lines of credit. So I think if I had any advice for the government, it would be to help the debt packages, to help package up debt for infrastructure so that the companies that do want it, that will put their capital down and expect to be able to pick up commercial debt to match it, find they can't pick up the commercial debt, and therefore I think the government could do something about that.
Should the big funds be used for that? The infrastructure funds, the future fund, etc.? That's big blocks of money.
Well, yeah, but I mean, again, this is where you mentioned before about the budget and the stance of fiscal policy. It should be expansionary. Some of it will be directly to people through tax cuts. Other bits of it should be through these sorts of other measures.
Paul Keating, we're out of time. Sad to say, it's always fascinating to talk to you. We thank you very much for coming in to speak to us on our first night back in 2009. Thank you.